"Open up, this is the HOA authority." The pounding on my front door rattled the wood so hard I thought the frame might crack. My coffee cup nearly slipped from my hand, hot steam swirling up into my face as I froze mid-step in the living room. It was 6:30 in the morning, the sun barely peeking over the lake, and already someone was shouting like they had every right in the world to be on my porch. I set the mug down slowly, my eyes narrowing as I peered through the side window. 3 men stood there, blocking the rising sun with their broad shoulders. They wore bright reflective vests, clipboards clutched in one hand, shiny badges dangling around their necks. For a second, to someone else, they might have looked official, like code enforcers or inspectors, but the way they carried themselves, the way their eyes darted nervously, and the tone of their voices told me something was off. Their leader, a tall man in mirrored sunglasses, barked again, "You are in violation of HOA firearms regulations. Step aside and let us in, we have authority to confiscate your weapons immediately." I almost laughed out loud at the absurdity of it. First off, I didn't live in any HOA. My lake cabin sat on 40 acres of private property that I bought outright with my own money after retiring from service. No homeowners association rules reached this far into the woods, and I had intentionally chosen this land because it was free from that nonsense. Second, no HOA, real or fake, had any power to confiscate weapons. The whole setup stank of something wrong, something staged. My instincts, sharpened by years of Navy SEAL missions where reading a situation in seconds meant the difference between life and death, told me exactly what was happening. These weren't officers. They weren't inspectors. They were imposters, scammers trying to bluff their way inside. I opened the door just a crack, enough to let my voice carry but not enough to give them any advantage. "Funny," I said slowly, keeping my tone calm but edged with steel, "I don't recall ever signing into an HOA. And I sure don't recall handing over my rights to 3 strangers who show up screaming on my porch before sunrise." The man in sunglasses shifted his weight, trying to look bigger, more intimidating. He jabbed his finger at the doorframe. "Sir, if you don't comply right now, we will have to seize them by force. Those are the rules. Firearms aren't permitted here under HOA regulations." His words rang hollow, the kind of scripted nonsense someone memorizes but doesn't really understand. The second man, shorter and twitchier, adjusted his vest nervously. He didn't look like law enforcement. He didn't even look like security. He looked like a desperate man trying to play a part. The third one hung back, eyes darting around my property like he was already casing the place for valuables. My jaw tightened. I'd seen this before, back in deployment overseas, men disguising themselves in whatever authority they could mimic, thinking a uniform or a badge would be enough to scare people into submission. And maybe it worked on the average homeowner. Maybe it worked on some poor guy who never held a rifle outside of hunting season, someone who didn't know how to push back against intimidation. But on me? On a man who spent decades in service, who had stared down actual armed insurgents in hostile territory, who had lost brothers in firefights and learned to read danger like a second language? Not a chance. I set the coffee aside on the table near the window and opened the door another few inches, stepping into the frame. "Let me tell you something," I said, my eyes locked on the leader. "I don't live under your HOA. This is private land. You have no authority here. And if you think you're walking through this door and touching a single thing inside, you're dead wrong." The shorter one shuffled his feet, glancing nervously at sunglasses like he was silently begging him to back off. But the leader doubled down, his voice rising. "We've handled tougher cases than you. We've taken weapons from plenty of stubborn homeowners. Don't think you're special. You're not above the rules." He said it with conviction, but his fists were clenched too tightly, his stance too stiff. It was all an act, and I could see the cracks forming. I tilted my head, giving him the faintest grin. "You boys made a mistake today," I told him flatly. "You picked the wrong house. You picked the wrong man. And you've got about 10 seconds to leave before this turns into something you're not ready for. I watched the twitchy one swallow hard, sweat already forming on his forehead. He was scared. The third man finally muttered under his breath, "Let's just go, this isn't worth it," but Sunglasses held his ground, jaw tightening like he thought he could win a standoff against me. That grin of mine widened. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step back. I just stood there, steady as a rock, years of discipline holding me still while adrenaline started to hum in my veins. I knew exactly how this would play out if they pushed me. They thought I was some aging veteran tucked away in the woods, someone they could bluff and rob. What they didn't realize was that every second they stood there, they were standing in front of a man who had spent his life neutralizing threats faster than they could think. They didn't know a SEAL lived here. They didn't know they had just poked a hornet's nest with their cheap little fake badges and shaky voices. And as I slowly opened the door wide and stepped out onto the porch, I could see it dawn on them, this wasn't going to go the way they expected. I let the door swing open wider and stepped out onto the porch, letting the boards creak under my weight. My movements were deliberate, slow, and steady, the kind of controlled calm that unsettles men who are used to bluffing their way through life. I didn't need to raise my voice, because when danger is real, volume doesn't win fights, control does. I locked eyes with the man in sunglasses and said, "You're trespassing, impersonating authority, and threatening a man in his own home. That's not an HOA violation, that's a felony." The shorter man, the twitchy one, licked his lips and shifted his clipboard nervously. His eyes darted from me to the leader like he wanted to back down but didn't have permission. His voice cracked when he tried to speak. "Look, man, we don't want trouble. Just give us the guns and we'll be out of your hair. Quick. No fuss." His words sounded rehearsed, shaky, like he'd said the same line at other doorsteps and hoped it would work here too. I stared at him for a beat too long, watching sweat bead on his forehead. "No fuss?" I repeated, stepping closer. "You show up on my land with fake badges and fake authority, threatening to take what doesn't belong to you, and you call that no fuss?" My tone was low, sharp, like a blade drawn just far enough from the sheath for everyone to see the edge. The third man, the one who'd hung back up until now, shifted his weight and I caught the outline of a cheap pistol tucked under his jacket. His hand hovered near it, hesitant, like he wanted to look tough but didn't have the guts to follow through. That was my final confirmation, these weren't any kind of officers. They were thieves dressed up as authority figures, hoping fear would do the heavy lifting. I let a grin tug at the corner of my mouth, a grin that said they were already in over their heads. Then I leaned closer to the leader, my voice dropping to a growl. "You've got 10 seconds to get off my porch before I treat this as a home invasion." Sunglasses puffed out his chest, tried to hold the line. "Don't test us," he said, though his voice wavered at the edges. "We've handled guys tougher than you. You're not special." That was it, the line that flipped the switch in me. I stepped forward in a blur of movement, years of training snapping into place. My hand shot out, grabbed the twitchy one by the vest, and yanked him toward me. He yelped, stumbling as I spun him around and slammed him against the porch railing, his clipboard flying into the dirt. His breath whooshed out of him like air from a punctured balloon, and he froze, wide-eyed, staring at me like a rabbit caught in headlights. At the same time, the third man went for his pistol. His fingers barely brushed the grip before I pivoted, one hand still holding the twitchy guy pinned while the other shot out with precise speed. I struck his wrist hard, forcing his hand open, and the pistol clattered uselessly to the floorboards. I kicked it out of reach in one smooth motion. The look on his face when he realized how fast he'd been disarmed was pure disbelief. Sunglasses took a half step forward, fists clenched, but the moment my eyes locked on him, I barked one word with the kind of command that doesn't come from pretending, it comes from living it. "Don't." That one word froze him in place. His bravado melted, his fists loosening at his sides, though he still tried to mask it by scowling behind those mirrored lenses. Meanwhile, the man I had pinned against the railing whimpered, squirming like a trapped animal. Hey, chill, man. We didn't mean nothing, just let us go. His voice cracked, desperation dripping from every syllable. I pressed harder against his chest, my tone low and lethal. Didn't mean nothing. You show up at my house with a gun, threaten me with fake authority, and tell me you're here to take what's mine? That's more than nothing. That's a declaration. The disarmed one rubbed his wrist, shaking, glancing at his buddies like maybe one of them still had the guts to turn this around. He looked at the pistol lying in the dirt but didn't dare move toward it. My stare pinned him in place just as firmly as my hand held the other against the railing. Sunglasses finally spoke again, though the cracks in his voice betrayed him. You don't know who you're messing with. We've done this before. We've taken plenty from stubborn folks like you. We always win in the end. I chuckled, low and dangerous, the sound vibrating through the quiet morning. You think you've dealt with tougher than me? Son, you've never seen tougher than me. I've stared down men who knew what they were doing, who had training, courage, and firepower. You three aren't them. You're nothing but cowards in cheap vests. His jaw tightened, but he didn't move. The twitchy one under my grip started to nod rapidly, like his body agreed with me even if his mouth didn't. I finally shoved him off the railing, making him stumble forward toward his crew. He staggered, nearly tripping, gasping as if fresh air had just been returned to his lungs. I straightened up, towering over them, my stance steady and immovable. Here's how this is going to go, I said, my voice cold and calm. You're going to leave right now. You're going to pick up your little toy badges, your clipboards, and your pride, and you're going to get off my land before I change my mind. And if I ever see you again anywhere near this property, I won't stop at words. Do you understand me? The twitchy one nodded frantically. The disarmed one muttered something under his breath but didn't dare argue. And Sunglasses, for the first time, shifted his feet backward, just an inch, but enough to show me he knew he'd lost. He tried one last bluff, his words dripping with false bravado. This isn't over, he muttered. I stepped forward once more, slow and deliberate, closing the gap until he had no choice but to retreat down the porch steps. My eyes burned through those mirrored lenses, and I said in a voice so cold it cut the morning air in half, for you, it is. The weight of those words hung in the silence like thunder after lightning. They knew I meant it. They knew the game was over. And as they shuffled toward the path leading back to their car, every ounce of swagger they'd arrived with was gone, stripped bare by the reality of what they'd walked into. I stood at the top of my porch as the three men retreated like whipped dogs, their fake vests and cheap badges catching the faint glint of the morning sun as if mocking them. My eyes followed every step they took down the gravel path to their dented black SUV parked near the edge of my land. The way they glanced over their shoulders told me everything, they weren't finished. This wasn't the type of crew that would simply walk away after being humiliated. Men like that don't take lessons, they take revenge. I knew the look of desperate criminals trying to save face. I'd seen it in combat zones, in the eyes of insurgents who swore vengeance after a failed ambush. They always came back, usually louder, often dumber, and sometimes deadlier. The twitchy one kept muttering to himself, arms flailing as if he were rehearsing what he'd say next time. The disarmed one held his wrist gingerly, his pride stung more than his skin, and his eyes burned with frustration. And the man in sunglasses, the so-called leader, climbed into the driver's seat with a forced calm that only made him look more rattled. Their SUV sputtered to life, gravel spitting under its wheels as they pulled away with more noise than speed, trying to leave like victors even though they'd just been routed. I didn't move until the sound of their engine faded down the road. Only then did I take a slow breath, scanning the tree line, the driveway, and the shadows around my cabin. Years of training left me with instincts most men don't understand. A quiet threat is never gone, it lingers, stalks, waits for weakness. I picked up the dropped pistol from the porch floor, unloaded it with a quick snap of my wrist, and tossed the empty frame into an old metal bucket by the railing. Cheap. Rusted. Barely maintained. No real soldier would trust his life to a weapon like that. These men weren't professionals. They were scavengers. But scavengers grow dangerous when they're cornered, and I knew I'd embarrass them too deeply to let them go without expecting their return. I stepped inside the cabin and closed the heavy oak door behind me, locking it with a practiced hand. My home wasn't just walls and wood, it was a fortress, designed the way men like me build when they know what true danger looks like. Reinforced frames, hidden cameras, and more than a few surprises tucked into places no one would expect. I'd built it this way for peace of mind, but tonight it felt more like preparation for the inevitable. I sat at the kitchen table, my mind playing out scenarios like a tactical exercise. They could come back tonight. Or tomorrow. Or with more men. I thought about calling the sheriff, but the moment I put the radio down, my cabin seemed to inhale the silence around it, holding that breath before the storm. On the monitor, the 5 shadows crept closer, their boots crunching on the gravel though they tried to move like ghosts. They weren't soldiers. They didn't know patience. They were anxious, twitchy, and sloppy, every step giving away their desperation. I let them come, eyes flicking from one camera feed to the next, mapping their movements in my head the way I'd once mapped enemy patrols in hostile villages. The leader in sunglasses, now without his false calm, signaled his men forward. One with the crowbar approached the porch stairs, pausing like he was waiting for courage to catch up with him. The twitchy one kept glancing back at the others, his hands shaking even while gripping his weapon. He wanted redemption, but his fear screamed louder than his pride. I stood slowly, rifle cradled but not raised, my body sinking into the rhythm I knew so well. Heart steady, breath controlled, muscles loose but ready. I'd been here before, too many times to count, waiting in the dark while danger crawled closer. The trick wasn't in killing, it was in control. A true warrior knows when to pull the trigger and when to let fear itself do the heavy lifting. I reached to the panel near the door and flipped a switch. Instantly, the perimeter lights I'd rigged up along the property blazed to life, flooding the yard in white beams brighter than headlights. The men froze, caught like rats in the open. Their bodies stiffened, shadows stretching long across the dirt. Every instinct they had screamed to run, but pride rooted them in place. I stepped onto the porch, the rifle resting casually in my arms, the porch light behind me casting my frame as a silhouette. My voice cut through the night, deep and steady. I told you once. You don't belong here. You've got 30 seconds to drop every weapon and get on your knees before this turns into something you don't walk away from. Their heads whipped toward me, panic flashing in their eyes as the illusion of control shattered. The leader shouted back, trying to sound bold but his voice cracked. You don't scare us, old man. We're taking what we came for, one way or another. His words echoed weak, hollow against the trees. The man with the crowbar lunged toward the porch, lifting it high. I didn't flinch. With one sharp motion, I raised my rifle and fired, not at him, but at the ground inches from his boots. The bullet cracked loud in the night, dirt exploding upward, the shockwave freezing him mid-step. He stumbled back, crowbar slipping from his grip as his nerve drained out of him. Next one, I growled, doesn't miss. Their eyes darted from me to each other, the thin thread of their bravado unraveling. The twitchy one raised his pistol, but his hands shook so badly I knew he'd never hit a thing. Before he could even steady himself, I barked out, try it, and I'll paint this yard with your regret. He froze, the pistol wavering, then lowered it ever so slightly. That was when the wail of sirens began in the distance. Faint at first, then growing louder, bouncing off the trees like a storm rolling in. Their heads snapped toward the road, panic taking hold. The leader hissed at them, "We don't leave." Not like this, but his men were already faltering. I heard the pickup truck's door slam as one of the new recruits bolted, abandoning ship the second the law got close. Another followed, sprinting for the SUV like a rat scurrying to its hole. The leader screamed at them to stand their ground, but it was too late. The flashing blue and red lights lit the treetops, and the roar of engines thundered up the gravel drive. Deputies poured out, guns drawn, voices commanding, "Hands where we can see them. Down on the ground, now." My rifle lowered slightly as I stepped back, giving law enforcement their stage. I wasn't here to play hero in front of uniforms, I'd already done my part. The fake officers stood paralyzed, caught in the trap they'd walked straight into. The twitchy one dropped his pistol, throwing his hands skyward as tears glistened on his face. The crowbar man knelt, muttering excuses no one listened to. The deputies swarmed them, boots heavy on the dirt, voices sharp and authoritative. They disarmed each one, zip ties snapping tight around wrists as they were shoved to the ground. The leader resisted, shouting nonsense about being official and in the right, but the deputies weren't buying it. One deputy ripped the fake badge from his vest and tossed it into the dirt with disgust. Impersonating an officer, armed trespassing, attempted theft. "Hope you've got a long time to think about your choices," the deputy growled. I leaned against the porch railing, calm as the storm broke around me. One deputy, a younger guy with sharp eyes, walked over and gave me a respectful nod. "Carter, we heard your transmission. You held it together like a pro. You're lucky you didn't drop any of them." I shook my head. "Wasn't luck. If they'd forced my hand, I'd have ended it. But humiliation's worse for men like that. Let the system chew on them." The deputy smirked, glancing at the 5 cuffed men being shoved into patrol cars. "Yeah, looks like they've already chewed each other enough. No honor among thieves." I watched the leader as he was shoved into the back of a cruiser, still shouting empty threats about coming back, about suing, about revenge. His words fell flat now, muffled by the reality of steel bars waiting for him. I knew his type. All bark, no bite when faced with someone who doesn't bend. The deputies finished clearing the scene, and the night grew quiet again, broken only by the chirping of crickets daring to return after the chaos. My cabin stood tall, its lights glowing soft against the lake, a beacon of calm after the storm. As the last patrol car pulled away, I exhaled long and slow, my grip loosening on the rifle. The silence returned, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was earned. Inside, I poured myself a glass of water and sat by the window, staring out at the tree line. Tonight proved one thing: peace isn't given. It's defended. And while those fake officers thought they could intimidate and steal, they learned what men like me already know: you don't threaten a warrior's home. Not with fake badges, not with guns, not ever. Because some houses aren't just cabins. Some are fortresses. Some are defended by men who fought real wars, and those men don't flinch. They don't run. They stand.